Realization of oneness, Joel S. Goldsmith, Chapter 11. Lifting up the I. There is no one mode, means, method, or system which can correctly be called metaphysical or spiritual healing. In fact, there are as many different approaches to spiritual healing as there are in materia medica with its allopathy, homeopathy, osteopathy, chiropractic, and naturopathy, all different forms of materia medica. In the world of metaphysical and spiritual healing, there are the evangelists who, by the grace of God, have received some special state of consciousness through which they heal without knowing how, why, or wherefore. For the most part, they do not have the slightest idea of any principle involved in healing. They only know that healings do take place, sometimes through the spoken word, and sometimes through the laying on of hands. Apparently, it is something that is just a part of their being, something that has come to them at a particular period in their life, and something over which they have no control. Then there are those approaches to healing which employ mental means, and by suggestion, attempt to change a diseased or evil condition into a good one. There are also methods which attempt to combine the mental and the spiritual. A person who has had any experience with other forms of metaphysical or spiritual healing and decides to practice healing through infinite way healing principles may have to unlearn most of what he has previously known in order to grasp these principles. And if he encounters difficulty on the way, it is probably because he has not yet unlearned enough. An understanding of immortality, basic to healing the infinite way, begins with an infinite, ever-present, omnipotent God. Its premise is that there is no imperfection in any part of God or of God's creation, none whatsoever. God is perfect being, and so, therefore, is God's creation. No one was ever born, and no one will ever die. No one ever had a beginning, and no one will ever have an ending. One way to understand the continuity of life is through the word I. This I, which is our identity, is actually coexistent with God. It is the eternal part of our being. It has no knowledge of birth or death. It is that part of our being which has existed for billions of years, and will continue to exist without interruption for many more billions of years. As long as there is God, there will be a you and a me because we are one with God. I and my Father are one and not two. The I which I am and the I which is God are one and the same I, and therefore I is immortal. Very often, when we think of immortality, we think of life beyond the grave, but we do not stop to realize that if there is any truth to immortality, it must also mean life before birth. We cannot be immortal if we have a life that ever began. Immortality is from everlasting to everlasting. God can no more begin than he can end, and if God and I are one, the I of me in that oneness has never begun and will never end. Our identity remains intact, spiritual, and perfect, not only after the grave, but it was so even before we were born. Our life from the cradle to the grave is that experience which has been likened to a parenthesis, but when the parenthesis is removed, we live in the full circle of immortality. It is true that while we may be aware of ourselves as living only in this particular parenthesis, slowly or rapidly moving from birth to death, actually it is possible for this parenthesis to be removed and for us to become aware of our true identity as one with the entire circle of life and its immortality and eternality. Once we can realize ourselves as I, separate and apart from personality, separate and apart from a physical body, as I, the incorporeal spiritual I, we will have the secret of the eternality and immortality of life, without beginning, without birth, without ending, without death. Since the I that God is and the I that we are one, we can understand that the infinite perfection of God is the infinite perfection of our being. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. This does not refer to material things, dollar bills, bank accounts, property, fur coats, or automobiles. All that I have means all the immortality, spirituality, integrity, all the life, all the perfection, all the holiness of God. All that is of God is of you and of me, because the I of you and of me and the I of God are one and the same I, and all the qualities of God are the qualities of spiritual, eternal, immortal man, of you and of me. This is the premise in infinite way healing work, and if we want to heal, we must first of all remind ourselves of this truth. We must be conscious of the truth that the I of you and of me and the I of God are one, and all that constitutes the I of God constitutes the I of you and of me, for we are forever one with the Father. All that is of God is ours. All the immortality, eternality, spiritual perfection, harmony, peace, justice, infinity. Discord, the fruitage of sowing to the flesh when we have established ourselves in that spiritual truth. The next question on which we must be clear is, but what about this sin, this disease, this false appetite, this lack or limitation, this unemployment, this lost baggage? All the writings of the infinite way clearly reveal where evil comes from and why it comes. They explain its relation to karmic law, as it is called in the Orient, or the as ye sow so shall ye reap of the Bible. He that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And the Master taught, He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. If we do not abide in the word and let the word abide in us, we will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off, withers, and dies. Every moment of every day determines what our tomorrows will be. As we sow in this moment, so will we reap tomorrow, next week, next year, or 10 years from now. This teaching has often been interpreted to mean that if we obey the 10 commandments, we are sowing good and will reap good. And if we disobey the 10 commandments, we are sowing to the flesh and will reap corruption. This is utter nonsense. It has no such meaning whatsoever. The as ye sow so shall ye reap doctrine means that if we abide in the spiritual truth of being, we will reap harmony because then we are sowing to the Spirit and will reap spiritual fruitage. But if we accept the world's belief in 2 powers, its belief in spirit and matter, in good and evil, then we are going to experience both good and evil. While we are part of this human race into which we were born, we are sowing to the flesh, and we are going to reap corruption, even if we obey the 10 commandments to the letter. This is what the Master meant when he said to his followers, Except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. 5. These 2 Hebrew sects lived in complete obedience to the laws of the temple. They dotted every I and crossed every T. They spent every moment required by theological law in worship. They observed every feast day, every fast day, and every holiday. They tithed. They sacrificed. They lived up to the 10 commandments and to all the laws of the temple. But Jesus said, Your righteousness must exceed that of those persons who are 100% perfect. It sounds impossible, but it is not. If we sow to the Spirit, we will be obeying the 10 commandments without even being aware of so doing and without any temptation to do otherwise. Therefore, we do not have to concern ourselves with the 10 commandments. What we have to concern ourselves with is to abide in the spiritual word of truth. This is not easy of accomplishment because it means that what we accept into our consciousness is going to determine our experience. We have to begin with the acceptance of the universal belief in good and evil, and we have to reject that and say to ourselves, No, I accept neither good nor evil. I accept only God, Spirit, as infinite all, and in God there is neither good nor evil. There is only spiritual, perfect, harmonious being. When Satan stands in front of us insisting that there are 2 powers, spiritual powers and material or mental powers, we have to be quiet enough so that the I of us can reply, No, I accept God. I accept spiritual being as the all. I accept the scriptural truth that nothing can enter God that defileth, or maketh a lie. 6-0. Only God is God, and God is infinite perfection, so there cannot be powers of good and of evil. There cannot be spiritual powers and mental or material powers. There can be only God power, infinite, spiritual God power. This refusal to accept in our consciousness good and evil, spiritual and material or mental powers. And this holding steadfastly to the word I is sowing to the Spirit. Concessions imposed because of living in this world. We are constantly faced with good persons and bad persons, but we cannot accept either good persons or bad persons, sick persons or well persons. We must accept only the children of God, spiritual identity. It is true that in our daily affairs and in our speech we make concessions to appearances. For example, every time anyone asks a practitioner for help, and he responds with, I will give you help. That is a concession to appearances, but it is something that must be done. No one can be completely absolute in such a situation and say, No, I will not give you any help because you are already perfect. The patient's response would very likely be, Well, if you won't give me any help, then I will find somebody who will. So an infinite way practitioner makes concessions and says, "Of course, I will give you help at once." But within himself, he cannot believe that. The I of him has to be knowing inwardly. No, the I which is God is myself, and the I which is God is yourself. There is only one power, there is only one presence, there is only one law, there is only one being. By the time the practitioner has attained this realization, the patient will probably be beginning to feel better. Nevertheless, a concession to the call for help has been made, and in a measure we do that in all our affairs. Politically, we will speak of one candidate as a good candidate, and another as a bad one. This is only a part of the human drama. Inwardly, we realize that for voting purposes we are judging those candidates from a personal standpoint in terms of our own frame of reference. Actually, we know better. We know that I am he. Even though he does not know it, we know. If we are not knowing that the I of me is the I of you, and the I of you and of me is the I of God, for we are one, we are sowing to the flesh. So it is that in normal, everyday conversation, especially with those who are not on this path, in speaking of the weather, the climate, germs, and all other so-called material powers, we are not going to argue with anyone and try to show how bright we are, or how stupid. Agree with thine adversary. Do not start an argument with anyone who is talking about what bad weather, bad crops, or bad times we are having. It is not so important what we do in the way of lip service. What counts is what we are doing within. Seeing through universal BELIFS in the area of RELATIONSHIPS in no area, is this better illustrated than with parents and their children? There are many occasions when parents have to discipline their children, and times when they may appear quite angry with them, but they must be sure that they are doing this only outwardly, not inwardly. In their hearts, they cannot accept this. Their outward show of displeasure is only for the purpose of correcting the young, immature thought that could not possibly grasp this idea of perfection in one explanation, and because of the universal belief, could not live up to it. For the most part, children are not children at all. They are just ages. There are 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 12-year-olds. Those falling into a particular age bracket act alike, and they are very much alike in their responses. It is only through the spiritual work and training of their parents that eventually they become individuals, but left to themselves, they all pattern their conduct according to the accepted standard of their peers at the different ages through which they pass. But this can be changed as parents understand that what they are being faced with as ugly behavior on the part of their child is merely a belief, universal to that age group. In the same way, we can bring out a different relationship with our neighbor and with the persons that we deal with in business, not so much by acting differently outwardly as by an inward realization of the truth of their identity. They are neither good nor bad. They are neither sick nor well. They are neither rich nor poor. They are spiritual. Spirit has no shifting, changing qualities, and its only quantity is infinity. To sow to the spirit, we must be continuously entertaining a spiritual awareness, having uppermost in our consciousness a spiritual understanding of the nature of God, man, and the universe. We must inwardly know that the only law is spiritual law, and in the knowing of this, mental and material laws are nullified. Once we have raised up the I in ourselves, so that this I that does not accept appearances is governing our experience, we will less and less accept powers of good and evil, or material and mental powers, but will recognize only spiritual power. This I that we have raised up within us that will not permit a negative thought to get past it, this I now governs our life and the lives of those who turn to us. This I we have had with us from the beginning. We brought it into this world with us, but because of the world's ignorance of truth, we also came into the world ignorant of truth. Because of that ignorance, what handled us, therefore, what has governed our lives, and what now governs the lives of all human beings is a form of hypnotism or malpractice. Whatever it is that makes us think good and evil, hear good and evil, see good and evil, and act from the standpoint of good and evil. In short, it is whatever makes us accept appearances at face value. Judge righteous judgment those who are not familiar with the optical illusions engendered by atmospheric conditions on the desert will probably accept the appearance of a big, beautiful lake with a wonderful city built around it which looms up before them, and will start driving their car toward that beautiful lake, even looking for a hotel where they can spend the night. However, those who understand the phenomenon of a mirage do not for a moment, accept the appearance of a lake or a city at face value. They instantly recognize that this is mirage. In this world, where an ignorance of truth predominates, we are constantly being faced with sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, with evil of every kind. We accept the world of appearances and pay the penalty for that acceptance. If, on the other hand, we have been spiritually taught, we will instantly recognize that these suggestions that come to us are appearances like the mirage on the desert. The Master taught, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." So I say to you, having eyes, do you not see through this appearance? Having ears, do you not hear beyond this appearance? Do not accept appearances of good and evil at face value. Accept them only as mirage, illusion, a form of malpractice or hypnotism, and above all things, do not accept them as something that has to be healed, reformed, changed, or corrected. Every day we meet up with material laws, mental laws, and legal laws. Every day we meet up with appearances of sin, false appetite, disease, evil. Men in government, and spiritual wickedness in high places. There is not a day in which these suggestions do not cross our path. We cannot avoid them, not by going away to a convent, a monastery, or an ashrama, because wherever we are we take the world right with us. Wherever we go, the newspapers will shout, and the radios will blare. As a matter of fact, the higher we go in spiritual realization, the more of evil and discordant appearances will be brought to our doorstep, because sick persons, sinning persons, and poor persons gravitate to those of spiritual light to pour out their burdens. And this is right. It is right. The Christ of us says, "Drop your burdens at my feet. My yoke is light. Just pour them all out. They are of no weight to me." We really do not have to get rid of any of the sins, diseases, lacks, or limitations of the persons who come to us. We merely have to refuse to accept the appearances and realize that whatever is presented to us is a state of hypnotism producing an illusion, a mirage. We must stand fast in spite of every appearance, in spite of every cry of pain, in spite of everything. I within you and I within me must stand fast and not accept it. Because the I within us has been lifted up, we see through the mirage to reality. In God's kingdom, there is not a sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. In the whole of God's kingdom, there is not an evil of any nature. We have to stand fast in that truth and let the appearances hit up against us until they break. Some of them break rapidly, some of them will not break so rapidly, and a few refuse to break at all. Why? One reason may be that as practitioners we are not rising quite as high into heavenly consciousness as we should be. I will admit that, if our practitioners could be a little more separate and apart from the ways of the world, they could do better works. But because we all have to live in this world, and with it, it may be that we do not rise high enough in spiritual consciousness to do all the works that we should do. The other reason is that the patients will not yield. They usually have in mind the changing of an evil condition into a good one, and this acts as a block. Spiritual healing is not changing an evil condition into a good one. Healing is really the changing of consciousness, and very often there is a reluctance or unwillingness to yield up whatever it is that is acting as a block. This is never done consciously. We never blame anyone for whatever it is that he is holding onto because he cannot help it, any more than we can help whatever it is that we hold onto. It is something deep down in our consciousness, and the answer lies in keeping on until there is a yielding. We cannot get rid of an appearance in infinite way healing work. We are not turning to God to heal anybody. We do not have the kind of God who would let anyone be sick if it were within his knowledge. And if we recognize God to be omniscience and omnipotence, we surely could not find anyone outside of God's knowledge. It is entirely a matter of the individual called a practitioner being able to rise to that state of consciousness which refuses to accept the appearance, knowing its hypnotic and illusory source, and the nothingness of it because it is not supported by a law of God. No sin and no disease are supported by a law of God. If they were, they would be eternal. We can never hope to change anything that is supported by God. If it has a law of God to maintain it, we cannot hope to break it, and the very fact that we do break through our sins, our diseases, and our lacks is sufficient proof that there never was any law of God supporting them. A law of matter, yes. A law of mind, yes. But these are not laws of God, and for this very reason, any form of evil can be dispelled. We need never be afraid to try to heal, regardless of the name or nature of the claim, because, to begin with, we have the awareness that there is no law of God supporting or maintaining any erroneous condition, and we know that no law of God created it. God never made it. Humanly, it is true that we are sick and we die. But let us this moment free ourselves from the superstition that God has anything to do with any of this, and let us put the blame on our own shoulders. It is our ignorance, yours and mine, nobody else. But if it is your ignorance and mine, it is only our ignorance because we are a part of the universal ignorance which has been handed down to us. Anyone can undertake healing work at any time if he will realize the basic principle that he is not trying to remove a disease, a condition, a sin, or a false appetite. The moment anyone tries to do that, he is trapped, and there will be no healing. We are not dealing with a sin, with a disease, with a false appetite, or with a lack. We are dealing with an illusory appearance that must be recognized as having no God law, God ordination, God presence, or God pour. We are not dealing with a condition, but with a universal belief in a selfhood apart from God. Any condition or situation is always a universal belief, always a universal claim. It is never the fault of our patient. It is never the fault of our student. It is never the fault of ourselves. It is a universal claim of two powers, a universal claim of a selfhood apart from God, a universal belief in good and evil. But the truth is I and the Father are one. All that is true of the Father is true of me because of oneness. God is spirit, and I am spiritual. God is immortal and eternal, and I am immortal and eternal. This is not only the truth about us. It is the truth about the patient, the student, or anyone who has called upon us for help. We are dealing with an appearance produced by a universal malpractice, a universal ignorance, a universal hypnotism, but only an appearance. We are not to attempt to get rid of the appearance. We can no more get rid of an appearance than we can get rid of the mirage on the desert. We can only see through it and understand it to be a mirage, and then go on about our business. Usually in the moment of our recognizing it as mirage, the picture dissolves. So it is, too, in healing. In our realization of the illusory nature of the appearance dissolves, and then the patient says, I am better, or I am healed. Do's and don'ts in healing work in the infinite way. We never give a treatment to a person. We give the treatment to ourselves. We are the one under treatment because we are the one to whom the appearance has been brought, and it must be met in our own consciousness. We never touch the mind of our patient or student. We never enter his mental home. We have no business there. Every person is a sacred being, sacred unto God, and we do not intrude into his mind or thought. If we do, we are practicing hypnotism or suggestion, and we are meddling in somebody else's mind. That is no part of the infinite way. In fact, we never mention a patient's name in our treatment. We never mention the name of his disease, sin, or fear, nor do we ever reach out to send a thought to him. Never. To do so is a serious offense in a spiritual teaching. What we do when the appearance is brought to us is to go immediately to the eye of our being, and abide there until we come to the conclusion that I and my Father are one, and that this is a universal truth. We wrestle with this truth within ourselves until we come to the point of conviction that there is only spirit. This teaching does not permit anyone ever, under any circumstance, to enter the mind or thought of a patient or to address him by name and say, you are well, or you are spiritual. None of that is acceptable practice in the infinite way. When in the infinite way a person says, I have a headache, I immediately forget him and deal with myself. The appearance of a headache has been presented to me. The appearance of a sick person has been presented to me. What am I going to do with it? And so I realize, Joel, you are not going to accept that for one single moment. You know better. You know that I and my Father are one, and that you have nothing to do with healing any person out there. You know, Joel, that all that God is, you are. You know that there is only spiritual law, spiritual being. You know that there are not good people and bad people. You know that there are not sick people and well people. You are dealing with God and his perfect spiritual creation, and all other appearances are but the product of a universal hypnotism, a universal malpractice, a universal belief in two powers. If I keep that up within myself, eventually it comes, yes, that is truth. Then I am quiet, and in a few moments a deep sense of peace comes, a click, a deep breath, something or other, and I know that God is on the scene, and that is all there is to it. As you can see, I have had nothing to do with the patient. The person may call, write, or cable me an hour later or the next day, and I may have to go through this same process again. If he does not respond quickly, I may have to stay with him for months and months, but the procedure is always the same. Never do I work through suggestion. Never do I work through hypnotism. Never will I enter the consciousness of any person. My object is not merely to change a person's sickness into health. My object is to lift him in consciousness, not by doing something to him, but by raising up the I in me. And then, if I be lifted up, he is drawn to that level of consciousness, but without my having to do anything humanly about it, or about him as a person. That is why it is necessary, first, to establish ourselves in the absolute conviction that there is a my kingdom, a spiritual kingdom, and that nothing that defileth, or maketh a lie, can ever enter that spiritual kingdom of God and his spiritual universe and spiritual man. Practice is essential. Through conscious realization, we must establish the truth of our oneness with God, our oneness with spiritual perfection. Then, from there on, we are not dealing with persons or conditions. We are dealing only with the world of appearances or illusion. The illusion in one place may be a lake, and the illusion in another may be a city, but it is all illusion, and the substance of an illusion is nothingness, whether it appears as a lake or a city. The substance of illusion is the same, whether it appears as a cold, a headache, a cancer, tuberculosis, a broken bone, poverty, or unemployment. It is always nothingness, the arm of flesh, 11 appearance. Behind it is the activity of a universal malpractice or hypnotism, which is produced by the universal belief in two powers. The healing principle of the infinite way is simple. But no one can bring about healings quickly just through knowing the letter of truth. It is working. With it, that develops this consciousness. It becomes second nature not to take in the appearance as if it were a condition, not to condemn a person, not to react to any appearance presented by a person. And that is when the healing consciousness is in full bloom, and then is when our healing ministry begins. Up to that time, we are practicing, and practicing to develop that consciousness. The consciousness that does not respond to appearances, the consciousness that is aware of the spiritual nature of creation and of the illusory nature of appearances, is a healing consciousness. Every serious student must work with these principles and practice them with the most insignificant claims that arise. Many times letters come hesitatingly asking for help for a cat or a dog. My answer always is the same. I am not interested in whether it is your cat or your dog. I am interested in the appearance that is being presented to me, and that is what must be met. By meeting it when it appears in their cats or their dogs, later on they are enabled to see how to meet it in a human being. Never, never for a moment think that there is anything so small, so tiny, or so insignificant that these principles should not be applied to it, because I can assure you that in applying them to the small things of life, you help to develop the consciousness for undertaking the greater ones. Keep yourself in the consciousness into which this lesson lifts you, because it is all too easy to come down to the human level and be frightened by an appearance of disease, sin, or lack, whether that appearance is presented as a child or a grown-up. It is only by abiding in these principles that fear is dissipated, and automatically every error is wiped out through the recognition. Illusion, hypnotism, malpractice, and appearance. The more you can deal with all error in that way, the better healing work you will accomplish. The deeper you go into the healing consciousness, the more you find yourself living so in meditation that you do not have to go into a deep meditation with every claim that comes because you are in it 9/10 of the time. You will find, however, that it is necessary to go into meditation 10, 20, or 30 times a day, not for the sake of meeting a specific call, but in order to maintain that inner communion constantly. Then the calls can come thick and fast, and no specific meditation is necessary because you are living in that I which has been lifted up in you, the I which is the healer. But I warn you, if your patients are not getting the results that they should get, it is because you are not meditating often or deeply enough to bring forth that depth of realization of God that is necessary. There is no such thing in this work as merely saying piously, "Oh, let God do it." There is no God on the field until you have brought God onto the field by this inner realization. Do not forget that there would be no sickness in the world if God were on the field. There would be no sin or death on earth if God were on the field. It is only when you bring God to the scene, by raising up the I within you, that you wipe out the discords of sense and bring forth divine harmony. It is possible to bring the very presence of God to earth if you will meditate, make contact with your center, and let that presence be released into the world.